Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on our Effective Children's Safeguarding During COVID-19 webinar. I'm hosting this webinar on behalf of Zen Educate today. Zen Educate are an ethical alternative to traditional recruitment agencies, social enterprise and Crown services supplier. Today we're welcoming colleagues from across the UK. We can't see you because we're on a webinar, but do say hi in the chat if you'd like to and let us know where you're from. We'd love to see who's here. We know that well over 100 people have signed up, which is fantastic. The format today will be some brief introductions to the panel, followed by each panel member sharing insights and good practice from their area of expertise. Then we'll take some live questions. So if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. We may not get through all of them, but we will do our best. If you have any general questions or comments about the session or tech questions, do add those in the chat box. And one of the Zen team, who I know is on the call, we've got a couple of people helping out who you can't see, but somebody will help you. Okay. So first of all, let me introduce Hayley Cameron. Welcome, Hayley, to our session today. Hayley is the Education Safeguarding Manager at Cognus Limited, who provide services for the London Borough of Sutton and the local area. Welcome, Hayley. Thank you for joining us. Thanks. Cathy Graham is the head teacher at Wellfield Infant School in Trafford, and also an education consultant. And you've also served on Trafford's Children's Services Improvement Board, and you specialise in early years inclusion and special educational needs and disabilities. And I know from chatting with you previously, Cathy, you're also very involved in the new Teaching School Hub that's been set up with Bright Futures. So congratulations on that bid. I know everybody's really excited about it. And again, welcome to the session today.
Thank you. Morning, everyone.
And Rafik Iddin, you're an independent social work and safeguarding consultant. You've previously held assistant director roles, and you now work mostly on serious case reviews, investigations, team training and development, both in the UK and overseas. And you also chair Olive Branch Fostering Panel. So also welcome this morning, Rafik.
Many thanks and good morning, everyone. Good to be with you all.
Okay, we're going to dive straight into some questions. And the first question that we're looking at today, Cathy and Hayley, I know you're going to respond to. So we're going to look at this question. What are the most important considerations for school leaders prioritising children's safety and well-being at the moment?
Thank you. I think the main question that's been on all of our minds are, where are all of the children who are on our roll right now? Are they at home, in school, online? And suddenly the spaces and places that we are trying to reach are different. The oversight has increased, and that has had significant impact on staff resources. We're all aware of our vulnerable children, but the pandemic has impacted on our families in such a range of different ways, and that's from unemployment, mental health, financial problems, housing, and some even suffering bereavement. This has meant that the children who are deemed as vulnerable may also need a high level of support. This picture is also constantly changing, and that's been really, really difficult in our schools. So it's about having those regular check-ins and the opportunity for those children and their families to really open up and reach out, to feel safe to do so. Some are more comfortable with doing this than others, so it really is also up to us to reach out.
Yeah, I think that one of the main things that has been a real challenge for us is that a lot of the agencies that we would normally rely on to work with us to help to look after children and keep an eye on them have been limited with regards to the contact that they can have with the families. So, for example, our health visiting team for quite a while were advised not to do home visits, and normally we'd be liaising with them, checking in what they've seen at the home compared to what we've seen at school. If those children aren't in school at all, you know, that we were relying on those sorts of people even more. We've managed to get around that to a certain extent by liaising with other agencies about setting up more sort of doorstep visits and things like that. The other thing is, obviously, we've sort of supported the staff and advised them about the kind of things that they could look out for when the children are coming on online learning, for example. And also if they're communicating with parents online, we've been advising the staff about the kind of things that might give a suggestion from a parent that things aren't okay, and how they could perhaps help us to respond to that. I think the other thing's been with regards to some of the families, like Hayley was saying, maybe not being as confident in approaching us about the difficulties that they're having. So the other thing that we've been doing quite a lot is regularly on our Facebook page and by email sending out links to local services and signposting them to things that are local, so that if they don't feel they can say something directly to us, they do have somewhere else that they can tap into. So we knew of a couple of local services that were for emotional support for parents, but also emotional support for families as a whole, that we knew we'd sort of quality assured them. We knew that they were a safe place for people to go to. So we've been sort of making sure that we shared that information of what was out there elsewhere as well. But a lot of it is knowing your families, and also keeping really creative lines of communication open to people, because some people will contact you one way but not another way. So it's been quite creative with how you can go about that, I think. Yeah.
I think, as Cathy said, it's, you know, finding different ways to ensure that the voice of the child being heard. We have to do this, you know, usually when they're in school, that's quite easily done, but they are virtual, remote, some we're not having access to. We need to ensure that the children have been given the opportunity to share what's going on for them, and as Cathy said, in a range of different ways. Some will feel quite confident to just say during a virtual call, some won't. So we've really had to do some thinking around that to really find out how they're feeling. And I think, you know, that emphasises that school leaders have such a huge responsibility to safeguard our children, but it's also being aware of what is going on around them. You know, some families are struggling with trying to homeschool, care for family members, hold down their own jobs, and we've really had to be flexible in our approach to what we've expected with regards to home learning. It's really just checking in on them and checking they're okay first.
Yeah. I think probably other schools have found the same. We found, particularly in this lockdown, that children and parents' well-being has felt very different. So, you know, people have struggled more this time. Mm-hmm. We've had probably higher expectations put on the children by what schools are being asked to give them this time around, if I'm honest. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but some children, it's put more pressure on the parents. That's then fed into how the children are feeling. And we've had a lot more parents saying that the children are refusing to do things, having meltdowns, getting upset, struggling with sleep has become quite a big issue for a lot of children. So again, it's been about finding ways of supporting families sort of remotely with that kind of thing, giving them advice, sending them things. We've made packs for people of things they can try, and books that they can share with the children that they can come and collect and things like that. But yeah, it's been a real challenge, that, I think.
Okay. Oh, sorry, go on, Hayley. Were you going to say something else?
Yeah, just to say, it really has been about ensuring those regular check-ins and building those trusting relationships. Any kind of communication that we can have, we have tried to do, and as Cathy mentioned earlier, in very creative ways, and sometimes that has meant doorstep visits. But we've also, as professionals, had to ensure the safety measures are in place for those children that are attending school, and providing a new norm for them. And that's been, you know, we've had to deal with different levels of anxiety, as well as trying to teach the different aspects of the curriculum. So it's been a real learning process, and obviously the thought on everyone's mind as well is preparing for what school will look like when all of the children do finally return.
Yeah. So there's some lovely messages there about really making sure we hear children's voices, and that we understand, really get to know the families and understand their context, and find ways for them to be comfortable to respond and get in contact with us. And actually really important messages about the importance of children being seen, that we have to find a way of actually seeing children. Rafik, is there anything you wanted to add? I know we've got some questions that we're going to give specifically to you in a minute, but is there anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think there are some really important principles there in terms of, I mean, the key issues there around visibility, the absolute paramount importance of listening to children and understanding their lived experiences at home or the family settings that they're in. And finding creative ways of enhancing visibility wherever we can, and we have good ways of doing that, you know, in terms of Zoom or Teams or the various technological ways that we can do that. But I was talking to a colleague last week who is really interesting, who was talking with a family online. And during the course of the exchange, one of the family members inadvertently knocked over the laptop or the device. And what became evident was a very young child sleeping in very unsuitable conditions on the floor, which wouldn't have been seen or noticed had that accident not taken place. So it's about, I think, ways of enhancing and being creative in terms of greater visibility.
That's helpful, thank you, and thanks for sharing that. That's a good piece of insight. Okay, I'm going to move us on to question 2. So what can school leaders be doing if they have ongoing concerns about children which continue to be unresolved?
I think having, you know, one of the key things is having the opportunity to talk through those concerns and to know who to talk to, working with multi-agency partners. That's been of paramount importance, you know, always, but especially during this time. Understanding the local escalation processes and the importance of how to use them, and being confident and prepared to follow that through. If you're not happy with something, everyone is responsible. If you're unsure, it's looking on how you can progress or ask for feedback. To get clarification of why a case is where it is. You know, sometimes we're not happy with how things are followed through, but it's having an understanding of why those decisions have been made. So the opportunity to talk and really understand what's going on is really, really important.
Yeah, I mean,
go on, Cathy, do go.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, one of the things that we are constantly stressing is that it's really important to have really good record keeping, so that we've got as much information as we can, and that's all, everybody knows, you know, how to access that. But yeah, going back to what Hayley was saying, our thing has always been about, you know, if we're not happy with what's coming back, we ask for clarification, we ask how that family assessment has been carried out, we ask because we have a copy of our local sort of grid that tells you how things get assessed and how things move from one level to another. We can question that. We can say, well, you know, this is the criteria, so how does that fit in with the criteria that, you know, is for our local authority? So knowing the system is helpful, and asking how the assessment's been carried out and how that fits in with the levels that have been agreed, and feeling that confident to do that, because it's hard when you're challenging other professionals, isn't it? But I think at the end of the day, you know, if it's about safeguarding, that sort of is our driving force, isn't it? And I think other professionals respect that as well. I think they understand why that you're going back about things and asking hard questions. You know, it's right to do so, isn't it? So yeah, I think questioning things, you know, don't shy away from it, I would always say. And, you know, wait till you feel satisfied that it's come to the right conclusion.
All right, now that's really helpful. So continue asking the questions, be curious, and actually the importance of not giving up until you're satisfied with the conclusion. And Hayley, the point about knowing your local escalation processes.
Yeah, and I think it should never, you know, it can be really emotive when you're dealing with these difficult cases, and it should never be a single person who's shouldering all of the responsibility, although at times it does feel like that. It's about involving the right people that can share information, provide the right level of help at the right time. And, you know, the fact of don't assume that someone else is acting on a disclosure. And, you know, all the information is needed from everyone, all different partners, all different agencies to complete the jigsaw. And I can't really stress the importance of, you know, developing the systems and forms of communication, building the relationships not only with the multi-agency partners, but with the families, so that vital information can be shared. Yeah.
Thank you, Hayley. I'm going to jump us on to the next question. Rafik, I'm going to give a couple of questions to you now. Because I know you've done lots of research because of your serious case review work. So what does the evidence show as being the most significant protective factors for children and young people?
Importantly, it's the issue that young people are listened to and taken seriously. We've talked a little bit already about the importance of the voice of the child, and also for practitioners and professionals to understand the lived experience of children. And that starts with listening carefully to children. It's also about relationships. It's about children and young people having at least one trusted adult whom they feel they can talk to, and how we cultivate those relationships with our young people. So there's that space for them to have that discussion if necessary. I always think of the author Alice Walker, who wrote The Colour Purple, and she said children need a witness. And that's about that. Can be like one person, can be a teacher, can be a teaching assistant, be a social worker, somebody they feel they can talk to and who understands their experience. The issue about being visible is absolutely critical. We've talked a lot already about that, particularly at this time. And having staff around you who are alert to the demeanour of children, their changes in behaviour, their physical presentation. That's about noticing. It's about widening your peripheral vision, so you are noticing things that are going on around you, and talking to and liaising with your colleagues as well. I think Cathy or Hayley just made the point earlier that safeguarding is not just the one responsibility. It's just not the responsibility of one person. It's everybody's responsibility. That was one of the key messages that came out of the Laming inquiry into the death of Victoria Climbié. And it was at one stage watered down to safeguarding is everybody's business, but it's more than that. It's everybody's responsibility. And I suppose one of the lessons, again, that came out of that particular inquiry was that, and I was thinking about this the other day because it's just over 21 years ago last week that Victoria Climbié died at the hands of her great aunt and her great aunt's partner. And whilst that case was particularly tragic in so many ways, Victoria got the best of responses from an unregistered childminder and a taxi driver who noticed particular aspects of her presentation, of her demeanour, of her injuries, that they wanted to do something more. That issue of tenacity is so important. And you often find that where it works well, there's one particular person who's sometimes just gone to the wall and said, you know, I'm not going home until I've seen this child. I'm going to keep phoning until I get the right response. So that issue of tenacity is really critical. And I suppose the final point is creating and facilitating that culture of inquiry and curiosity, asking the question. The principle of inquiry over advocacy, that we continue to inquire before we reach a particular standpoint or position. So those are the kind of key things that I think are so I suppose inherent in so many of the case reviews that I've been involved in.
Thank you for sharing that. It's for sharing it so powerfully and compassionately. Rafik, I'm going to move us on to just looking at the point about safeguarding being everyone's responsibility. And I suppose that whilst you talk through this, because I know this is a model that you and I have worked with when we've worked overseas with British international schools, but is there something that within this, if people consistently do really well, that you see making a significant difference in the work that you do?
Yes, I just looking at those headings, and they're so important, and they form a logical progression. The issue around probing, again, we've already touched on this in terms of that's the culture of curiosity, questioning, being clear in terms of when a child or young person talks to you, what are they saying? Record what a child or young person is saying to you in their own words. Obvious things such as not asking leading questions, but being open and respectful, being sensitive and compassionate in that exchange, creating a culture, if you like, a space where children feel comfortable in terms of what they're saying to you, and that when you're recording that, to really get it into a succinct and clear format, separate the facts out from your judgments, opinions, or assessments. And I often say to people when we're discussing this particular stage in the process, okay, give me 5 facts. And you very often just say, just hang on, that's an opinion, that's an assessment, that's a judgment. Give me 5 facts. So it's really important to separate the factual out from opinions, assessments, and judgments. So that's a really important point. In terms of alert, it's how we raise our specific concerns. It's knowing who to go to, who to have that conversation with, whether it's a designated safeguarding lead, whether that designated safeguarding lead makes the referral to the local authority, how that information is communicated. And a lot of concern around serious incidents have been around information sharing. It's not just about information sharing, it's what you do with that information and how you escalate it in the most appropriate way. The issue around challenge, and again, go back to the Laming inquiry in respect to the death of Victoria Climbié. What Lord Laming said was that he wanted practitioners to be competent and confident to really challenge. If you feel that the responses that you're getting are not being fully addressed or answered, or if there's further concerning evidence that's emerging, to continue to question, to continue to push, to continue to challenge, to continue to say, in as respectful a way as possible, I'm not happy with this. And again, that issue of tenacity is really key in that. The final point, I suppose, in terms of emergency, in those very rare situations where you have to respond and need to act in a way that's can sometimes feel a little bit draconian. And again, that's about scenarios where you may be saying, actually, I don't want this child to go home until the social workers arrived. I may need to phone the police about something, and it may be that the police need to initiate powers of police protection if there's a concerning issue. I mean, it's fair to say those situations are relatively rare, but it's about being clear in terms of what we need to do when we need to do it should the situation arise. So that's a very quick move through those 4 issues, but I think those are the key points there.
Okay, thank you. And I know you've already talked, so we might not need to spend too long here actually, but I know you've already talked about the importance of gathering your thoughts and concerns and separating out fact from assessments or opinions. Is there anything that you wanted to add just around that slide?
I think there's a couple of key issues here in terms of not just recording what you've seen or heard, but also about liaising with your colleagues in terms of what other concerns are there. It's about forming that holistic picture of the child or the family. What additional information do you have which might be aggravating or increasing the risk? And understanding that in terms of balancing that against what protective factors are in place which may protect the child or young person. And that's very much part of the kind of Strengthening Family initiative. Families are not just one thing or another. There are often real strengths in families that need to be capitalised on.
Helen, do you mind if I just add something in about this?
Do.
I think it sort of fits to the things that Rafik has been saying. One of the things that we've talked about quite a lot over the last couple of years particularly is the importance of us letting the staff or the children know what we've done about something, how we followed it up. So bearing in mind I'm an infant school, so our children are 3 to 7 years old. But right from the start, we taught them about what our job is and about how it's our job to look after them, to keep them safe, as well as to educate them. And we talk very openly with the children all the way through about who they can talk to if they need help and all of this sort of thing. But what we do find is that, and we do restorative practice for behaviour, so the children see that if they're not happy about how somebody's treated them, they will be heard and we will deal with it, and they're part of how we deal with it. And I think that's been really important, because it means that the children know that their voices are heard and that they're respected and that they're taken seriously. And it's the same with safeguarding. So if children bring points up with us, or, you know, if we have a concern about a child and the child is opening up to us, we always make sure that we tell the child what we've done about it. Now, we'll do it in a child appropriate way, and it might be certain things we can't really share, but we let the children know that we've talked to somebody about it, that it's important that they're safe and that they're okay, because that encourages them to know that we will respond and we will act upon it and we will take them seriously, and that helps them to then come back to us if other things come up. And the same with the staff. I think it's really important that if you follow something up, you go back to that member of staff and you let them know that you have followed it up and you've done something about it, because again, it encourages people to pay attention and to notice, but also to share it. Is that okay?
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you. And it's great to hear that follow through happens with the children, and actually that you haven't said, oh no, they're too young.
Yeah.
But actually the importance of valuing and recognising that where their cognitions are actually at 3 to 7. Yeah. And also very reassuring for staff to know, because otherwise staff having reported something are just in a void, aren't they? You know, well, has something happened? I don't know. You know, which is very unsettling.
Yeah, and obviously it's a need to know basis, isn't it?
Sure.
And sometimes there's things that we can't share in detail, but we let them know, you know, that it's being dealt with and it's being followed up, and generally we'll say at the very least with who. But yeah, I think that's quite important, because it encourages people to follow things up, you know, as and when then they feel like it is, you know, taken seriously. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to move us on to lessons learned from serious case reviews. And I read a really interesting comment the other day in a book around the difference between, excuse me, learning, which is when sometimes there's a kind of rationale for what went wrong, which isn't really learning, and what the writer referred to as validated learning, which led to a change in practice. And I know Peter Senge talked quite passionately about this when he wrote The Dance of Change, that actually unless there's change, we haven't really learned, because we haven't changed what we're doing. So Rafik, I'm going to give this to you, and some of this is about findings from serious case reviews that's actually in the guidance, and some of it is about findings from serious case reviews with some of the work that you've been involved in over the last sort of 6 or 7 years. And I'm aware that Cathy and Hayley may well have also been have contributed to serious case reviews as well, more recently than I have, I'm sure. So Rafik, let's start off just by looking at what's in the guidance. And you've all talked about some of these things already, actually, but in a kind of positive sense, the importance of them. So Rafik, just talk us through some of the points on this slide. I'm conscious of time, but we've definitely got time for this.
Yeah, some really important points here in terms of the importance of good recognition and response, that issue around failing to act and to refer on the early signs of abuse and neglect. And that's about noticing, it's about being aware of what's happening in a child's life and a family's life from an early stage. The early help programme was very useful in that respect, really, because it encouraged practitioners and professionals to really begin to act at the early signs of when families needed support, and not waiting till the situation became chronic or difficult, but then required a much more, I suppose, draconian intervention. That's really critical, and that's about the ability of staff to recognise, not just recognise in terms of what's going on with children, but then to have the confidence and competence to refer refer on. Good record keeping, absolutely critical in terms of factual observations, recording what children and young people say in their own words, the voice of the child. And where it goes wrong, it's where we fail to listen to children. It's where we fail to listen to children and young people, to take them seriously, and therefore to understand what's happening for them in their lives. And that ability to, I suppose you could say it's empathy, to see the world through the eyes of the child or young person that you're involved with is absolutely critical. Failing to reassess concerns when situations don't improve. I mean, assessments are never static, they're holistic, they're fluid. We need to constantly reassess and reevaluate what's going on in the light of new information, because it's an often changing set of scenarios. Absolutely critical in terms of the point around not sharing information. And we don't share information for a whole variety of reasons. We're worried about issues around data protection, around confidentiality. We think that perhaps somebody else is responding to the issue. And again, that relates to the concept of safeguarding being everybody's responsibility. Being prompt in terms of the information that we share, sharing information too slowly, that the agility and responsiveness of us is again really critical in terms of success. And lastly, a lack of challenge to those who appear not to be taking action. How we challenge and how we find a way to challenge respectfully and assertively, but in a way that's effective. Again, a really important point that's come out of a number of reviews. And again, we go back to the Climbier inquiry. Victoria Climbier has been so much on my mind this past couple of weeks because, as I said earlier, 21 years ago, last week when she died, that one of the issues that Elaine raised in that review was that when you are unhappy with a response that's given, or you feel that it's not satisfactory, continue to challenge and cultivate within your team that culture of assertiveness, if you like, that challenges when you're not unhappy with responses. So very quickly, those are the key issues.
Thank you. And then some of the points that you've, I know, come across in your own work over the last 6 or 7 years, and you've got some examples here of poor practice, but just talk us through what some of these mean, because I'm not sure everybody will know what some of these mean and the impact of them, really.
Yeah, I mean, very, very briefly, we could talk for a long time about some of it. It's a rule of optimism, and if people want to reference this, the authors were Dingwall, Eckler and Murray. I think it was back in 1983. And essentially, the rule of optimism is the way that we reframe scenarios in terms of rationalising away what's happened. It's a sense in which we're over-optimistic about what's going on in a child or a family's life. And it's that almost inbuilt tendency or bias to rationalise, to explain away, to almost say, no, that couldn't be the case. There must be a natural explanation for this. And when we over-optimise scenarios, we then miss the critical issues. And then the deficit is in terms of safeguarding and what doesn't happen. Not triangulating evidence. That's about the reliance that's often placed on self-reporting. Because if somebody says something to you and tells you what's going on, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's true. And that's about seeking the evidence in verification. And that's what triangulation means. It's not about taking what people say at first value, first principles. It's about saying, what other evidence is there that will corroborate what I've been told? Self-reporting just touched on. The rule of natural law, again, that relates to the rule of optimism. It's about essentially saying, no, these parents wouldn't do that to their children. They must love them. And that can sometimes obscure what's really going on in families. Not listening to children, we talked in great length about this, the importance of listening to children, understanding their experiences. Asking the question, And that relates to cultivating meaningful and sensitive relationships with our children and young people. So there's that space where that dialogue can take place. It kind of sounds simple, this, but creating a culture of kindness and sensitivity and respect and compassion are really important issues when we're working with children and young people, because that provides the space for them to not just disclose what's happening in their lives, but to find a trusted outlet they can talk to. And finally, assumptions about children, assumptions that and you often find this in terms of children are too young, for instance, to express their wishes and feelings. Very young children can be very clear about what they want to happen, what they want to see happening at home or not happen at home. And again, don't make assumptions that age can be a particular barrier about children being really clear what their wishes and feelings, their needs and desires are. So, yeah, so very quickly, Helen, I've moved through those, but those I think are the key points.
Thank you. And Hayley, I know you wanted to jump in there as well.
Yeah, I think I've been doing quite a lot of work around serious case reviews over the last few years, and I've recently completed a master's at the University of Kent. And one thing that really struck me is we know that lots of work and research has been going on over the years, but the similarities following the public inquiry into the death of Maria Colwell in 1974, and then, as you say, Victoria Columbi, and also Ellie Butler, and the more recent cases, and the themes that come out from those, the learning from those case reviews are so similar. So, again, listening to the voice of the child, or the voice of the child not being heard, lack of information sharing, and that lack of professional curiosity. And that always leads me to question, how is that still happening all of these years on? And although there is a lot of work happening, we've still got a way to go to get it right.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And you're right, though, we've seen a recurrence for as long as I can remember in my career, I think, of some of the same issues and our challenges. How do we help new staff coming through be aware of those challenges and actually be confident and competent to manage this work? So on that note, actually, our next question is really quite pertinent. So children's safeguarding, it always engages us at an emotional level, and so it should. But how can we manage our internal emotional responses in ways that help us communicate effectively and ensure that our decision making is still robust? And Hayley, I'm going to pass that on to you at the moment to respond to.
No problem. I think, as Cathy and Rafik both mentioned earlier, that importance of challenge and working with quite challenging cases and managing a disclosure from the start to the end can be really quite overwhelming. It can become quite exhausting, and I think having those opportunities to talk, reflection, and learning from things that haven't worked so well or things that have worked so well, so looking at both sides, things don't always go as you plan, but it's being able to reflect and learn from them, and recognizing how stress and anxiety can impair your ability to make informed decisions. So if you don't give yourself that space and you don't have those opportunities to talk through and really think about what went well, what went wrong, that's when the issues can arise. I think more importantly, more recently, really, the importance of reflective supervision, where people can share their feelings in a safe space without having fear of repercussions, and actually really being able to talk things through and how that's actually made them feel. Because I think, in all of our experiences, we can all see cases where actually it's impacted on professionals, personally as well as professionally, and that's what we want to try to avoid.
Okay, thank you. And I'm kind of noting your point about reflective supervision, because I think that's an area of sometimes I wonder if we actually have enough support around supervisors and how they can do that, how they can support their staff sufficiently. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that or take that further, or even recommend a resource that people could be looking at.
I think it's also that fear, sometimes when we talk about supervision, there are obviously different forms, and some are linked into performance management targets. I would move away from that person. And in my experience, that's worked better when it's not linked to your performance management targets. It really is that focus on emotional well-being. People are more willing to open up and share how they're really feeling.
Okay, thank you. Cathy, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think the supervision thing, what I've noticed is that that's in place perhaps more for some professionals than others, with regard to safeguarding particularly. So, for example, recently we've had to deal with quite a horrific case. The social workers have regular supervision with their managers to support them with this case. The school nurse has through their health team. And it sort of left me questioning, well, who does that for me as a head teacher? Now, I'm very lucky because my chair of governance, well, one of my chairs of governors, her background, she used to be in the child protection unit for the police, and she's our safeguarding governor. And, you know, I find her very helpful as a sounding board and things, but not everybody has someone in their governing body with that sort of experience. I think for head teachers, it's a real challenge, that finding the right person to give you that support, especially if you're a local authority school like me, and the sort of team around you within the local authority to help with that has been depleted. I speak very closely with my deputy safeguarding leads as well, so that we have that sort of opportunity there. I think the emotional response is very difficult for us, more than other professionals sometimes, because we tend to have the closest relationship with those children and those families as well. Yeah. So it's really taking that on board, isn't it, and making sure that you're looking at the facts and you're trying to sort of strip it right back all the time. So you have to be quite reflective, like the others were saying as well. That's really important. Yeah.
And thank you for raising that, because that's a very important point actually, around where head teachers get their supervision, particularly around safeguarding, which is outside of performance management, obviously. And I suppose it then becomes incumbent really on governing bodies and head teachers to support head teachers to perhaps find that externally sometimes at particular times over particular cases, and to recognise that might need committed time and committed budget actually to ensure that support is there for head teachers.
Yeah, I think it needs planning in. I think it needs to be that's part of, like you say, your budget, and that you actually pay for that support if it isn't readily available through other means. It's got to be done, definitely. Okay.
And this is, I always think with children's safeguarding, this is the number one priority. It's an absolute. We cannot neglect this, and we have to do our best. And actually, we have to prioritise it. And if that means additional time and resources to support the people doing that very challenging work, then we have to do that. We have to do that. It's a non-negotiable. Okay. I'm really conscious of time, and I know we've got one or two questions coming in, but we've also had some questions come in from people before the webinar. So I'm going to suggest that we just see if we can get through some of these at pace now, so that we've got some time to answer the live questions. So we had a question about the main changes to Keeping Children Safe in Education 2021. And my response to things like this is always, you're going to have to read the guidance. Okay, so we had a brief update following Brexit. So there is an update. The guidance specifies in Annex H what all the changes are for the January 2021 guidance. We've also got another set of guidance out now for consultation. And the Annex G, and I'm just going to hold it up like this for people. Okay, really helpfully, it always does kind of list for you over several pages what all the changes are that are being consulted on currently. And I would always encourage people just to read the guidance, go through the annex, mark up your guidance so that you know what's happening and know what the changes are. And there are some changes, quite rightly, because our understanding has moved on, and we know things now that we didn't perhaps know and understand 2 years ago. So sorry, but read the guidance, otherwise it would just be a massive information session. I've got a question about what should we do if a child makes a disclosure online. So Cathy, quick response if you can on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's about making sure that your training's really up to date for this, because and also as we've gone into remote learning as well, that there's a really clear procedure for staff to follow so that everybody is confident in how to respond. I had a query off a secondary head the other day where one of their staff, I suppose for us, it's more us communicating online with the children, either face to face or via parents by emails and messaging. Whereas in secondaries, the pupils might be messaging staff direct, and one of their staff had a disclosure made outside of school hours. So I think it's really important that staff are reminded about procedures if you know they can't get hold of you, and what they do in that scenario and how it's followed up then.
Okay, thank you. And Hayley, I'm going to give you, how can we monitor online safety during blended learning?
I think obviously online safety has been an increased factor, and due to more time being spent online, it's not only about upskilling the staff and the pupils, but also the parents, making sure they're all aware of the potential risks and understand what to look out for, and I guess more importantly, what to do if they have a concern and how to follow that up. Sharing information with parents, updating your acceptable use policies, in light of remote learning, and again sharing that with everyone involved, the staff, parents, and even to a certain level the pupils.
Okay, thank you, Hayley. And I know the NSPCC have got some good resources, haven't they, about this as well, which people can refer to. Okay, and lastly, Rafik, what should we do if other agencies are not engaging with our concerns?
And the simple answer is escalate, but it's about escalation in the context of knowing what your local arrangements are. So what are your district arrangements for social work services? Do you know the team manager? Do you know your school's representative on the local Safeguarding Children board? Is there a quarterly cluster meeting between schools and local authority staff that helps to build relationships and discuss the pertinent issues around referral or safeguarding? So I suppose the short answer is escalate, but escalate knowing who to have that conversation with. So if you're not getting the response that you feel is appropriate from a practitioner, have a conversation with the manager, build that relationship with the manager. If your local authority has a child protection unit or a conference and review unit, be familiar with that, have a conversation with them. Seek advice out from people. Sometimes we're a little bit reticent about just phoning, for instance, a child protection unit and saying, well, I've got a scenario, what might I do in this particular situation? It doesn't necessarily mean that the juggernaut of safeguarding inquiries will begin to roll forward. So that there are a number of things there that you can do when you feel that you're not getting the response that you want or need. Okay,
thank you. And I'm conscious that Hayley quite early on said, know your local escalation process, so make sure you know and understand. Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got a couple of live questions come in, and I'm actually going to start with the second question because I just need a bit more time to read the first one. So the second question I've got here, and it's, how can teachers / TAs be extra vigilant around children with special educational needs and disabilities, especially those who are non-verbal and cannot voice their concerns when they return to school?
I don't mind putting a little bit in about this, Helen, if that's helpful.
That's very helpful.
Yeah, we've had this exact discussion. One of the things that we do is we've trained our staff in using things like the Laven scales of wellbeing and involvement, because using tools like that, it can allow you through observations to notice changes in children's demeanour. Obviously, it goes back to training again, doesn't it? And talking about signs of abuse and things like that. We had a scenario a few years ago with a child who was non-verbal, who suddenly started being sick a lot. And, we were sort of trying to understand what that was about, health were involved. And that, in the long run, it came down to the fact that there were issues in the home and that they were hoarding and there weren't, it wasn't a hygienic place to be. But first port of call was staff flagging up that this child's been unusually frequently sick, so it can just be, changes in health situations as well as changes in general demeanour and things. But I think you have to help your staff a lot with this, looking for non-verbal cues and non-verbal signs, and I think things like the Latham scales are particularly helpful in that. And everybody needs training on them. We've even trained our midday assistants, our out of school club staff, everybody, so that everybody has some tools that they can utilise to help.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to comment on that as well?
I was just going to say the non-verbal cues, as you said, the observations, and looking for different ways. Very often, you know the children, you can pick up on those signs. Obviously, a lot of them have been out of school for a while, so there could be a whole range of different reasons. But also having those conversations with the parents, seeing how the parents are engaging as well.
Okay, thank you. Rafik, did you want to add something there?
No, it's just to reinforce that, really. I suppose it's about that concept of widening your peripheral vision, being aware of changes in demeanour, presentation, behaviour, what you notice, checking things out. The families are under enormous stress at the moment, particularly in respect to some of our, disabled children and young people, where, services such as short break care have been reduced. Families are under enormous stress at home, so it's understanding what's happening in a family situation, but being aware and noticing what's going on for the child or young person. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I've just noticed, Cathy, thank you for responding to Deb's question about the scale. So thank you for doing that on the chat. We've got another question here. I'm sorry to the person who's asked the question. I'm not sure I fully get this because I'm not familiar with the 3 houses work. Does this sound familiar to anybody on the panel? No, it's 3 houses work. Yeah. Oh, Rafik knows. Good. So this is a question about, we're very good at using the 3 houses work with children, but I've recently noticed children who are asked to do this more than once are starting to claim up. Is this a concern, and any ideas? But Rafik, if you're going to answer this, please tell us what the 3 houses work is, because that's a new one on me.
Yeah, it's 3 houses essentially. It's this direct work that you can do with children and young people, and children can decide what they put into a house of worries, a house of what they'd like to happen, a house of where they are now. It's essentially a way in which young people can describe what's going on for them, and convey and articulate what they'd really like to happen. So you get a sense. It's a really good tool for understanding a child's lived experience, that narrative of a child's lived experience. And I think the question was it, Helen? Was it children are starting to claim up if they're being asked to do this? Claim up. Yeah. Claim up. I'm not sure what that means in terms of claiming up. And I mean, what I can say is that during this particular time, children's perceptions will have changed.
Right. Sorry, it is clam up. You're right. I'm sorry. It is clam
up.
Right.
I thought, it's clam up. Yeah. I'm not sure whether that's a concern. That depends on how many times the child or young person has had this particular exercise done with them. It can be a useful tool to revisit in terms of where a child or young person feels they're at or what they want. If they've had it done a number of times, they might be a bit fatigued with it. I don't know. So it could be a concern, and I suppose that concern needs to be validated by another set of questions with the family, for instance, in terms of what's going on in the family home, or the family scenario to validate or not some of those concerns. So I'm not sure whether it would be a concern. It could be. But there needs to be some further exploration with family members, I think.
Okay. So we're back to being curious.
Sorry. Absolutely, and it's that kind of curiosity in terms of whilst we don't have the answer, we might need to make some further inquiries and ask some more questions.
Yeah. Okay. I could see people in the chat saying, "You're right, it's clam." Sorry about that. Can I just ask you, Rafik, because not everybody will understand the phrase direct work. Can you just clarify for people listening what you mean by direct work?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a way of, particularly when we work with children and young people, asking them direct questions is not always the most helpful way of building a relationship and helping them to convey or communicate important information. So we'll use toys or play material or art and crafts, or like a third object, if you like, to help facilitate that process. So that's when I talk about direct work. You could be working with plasticine, you could be working with certain toys, you could be working with crayons and paper. And the Three Houses work is a really good example of that in terms of helping young people articulate their wishes, their feelings, and their lived experience.
Okay, thank you. So this is direct therapeutic work we're talking about, really, with a child. Okay. Cathy, you've got a hand up.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think one of the problems that we very often have is once the child started to make disclosures, sometimes we feel that the family maybe put a bit of pressure on them to not say so much or put a bit of guilt on them or something like that. So that can cause that problem where they just don't, they clam up completely. Sometimes we need to backtrack on that direct work. You have to know the situation, don't you, like Rafik's saying, and really understand the context of what's going on. But sometimes there's ways around it by doing whole class work that just sort of helps to keep it on your radar. So as the children come back next week, we're all going to use a book. We have quite a lot of books that we use to help tease things out as well, which is a bit less intrusive sometimes. But we're all using the Colour Monster next week, which will allow children generally to talk quite openly about thoughts and feelings. And we know that there are some children who it might just tease back into that sort of discussion again. So sometimes you have to sort of know when to come in at a different angle, I think.
Nice. I think that's really helpful. Thank you. I love the idea of actually kind of the whole class doing a piece of work together like that. That's really lovely to hear. Okay, we're coming very close to 11 o'clock, so I'm just going to introduce us to the safeguarding training, which actually Rafik and I have written for Zen Educate in the last year or so. So the online platform at Zen allows people to complete their safeguarding training in their own time. And if you log into our training, the schools can see which members of staff are doing the training and see their progress. So for designated safeguarding leads and school business managers, there are obvious advantages there. It's already been taken by over 2,000 staff who currently work as supply teachers and teaching assistants for Zen, and also SEN support staff. And they're all vetted and work with us, obviously. 94% of the participants who have undertaken the training so far have rated it as good or excellent, which we're quite thrilled about. And as always, we will be reviewing it and updating it as the guidance changes. So we will update for the new guidance that comes out in September 2021. So as I say, Rafik and I were delighted really to have the opportunity to write that together, having done lots of training jointly overseas and in the UK previously. And being able to bring those different perspectives into the work. And it includes obviously kind of current and relevant guidance, and also because we're both really committed to it, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child is very much part of the training, which is right in there. So if you're interested to know more about that, you can get in touch with us at support@zeneducate.com. So we've heard really insightful and interesting good practice being shared today, some great questions. And most importantly, the education community are sharing their collective learning in a generous and timely way. So I'd like to thank all of our panel members for their time today, and for the preparation I know you all put in, and for sharing honestly and candidly, actually, with our colleagues on the call today. I'd like to thank the team at Zen, who are here behind the scenes and who've worked really hard to put the webinar together and ensure all the tech was working and have helped managing the questions. Thank you. We'd love to hear your feedback from this event, and we're also keen to hear what else you'd really like to hear on webinars and our podcasts, actually, because we have a 10 with Zen podcast now. So we're always interested to hear more about what you're interested in, what you'd like to hear more of. You can follow up on the socials because there will be a recording of this webinar, and we'll also make sure there's a post about it too. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I'm just going to give our panel like one last thing to say each before we sign off at 11 o'clock. So Hayley, Rafik and Cathy, in that order, one thing that you wanted to share at the end of your learning perhaps from this session.
So I think, you know, everyone working in safeguarding is doing an amazing job. It's been a particularly stressful time, but just remember there are always people there to talk to, and really reach out to people if you want to do that. But thank you for having me.
Thank you, Hayley. Rafik, one thing?
Yeah, I suppose for me, it's the importance of relationships and all of this. There are some things that you can't put in a quality assurance, performance management, numerical box. Some of those qualities that that our practitioners and our school leaders and our teachers and social workers have are so valuable in terms of helping keeping children safe.
Thank you, Rafik. And Cathy?
I think most of it's been said, but I think the other thing is just make sure that wherever you can, you're looking after yourselves, because the better you do that, the better you can look after everybody else, really. So, but thank you for having me this morning.
Oh, thank you so much, everybody. And we wish you all a very good rest of the day. And we will, as I say, circulate the slides. Keep well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.